Hi, and welcome to Bloody Good Reads. We are back, and it is a full run this year. Last year was quite a short run. Had a bit of a break once we got to 100 episodes, but this year we're going full force. And what better person to bring on the podcast than a huge name in horror? I have loved his work since the Final Girl Support Group, one of my favourite books. In kind of my top 10 of all time, actually. It's such a brilliant book. And his brand new book, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, is coming out very, very soon. We'll also talk about his love of horror, his love of movie, and a few more bits in between. Welcome to the podcast this week, Grady Hendrix.
Thanks for having me, man. It's nice to hear you saying such nice things.
No worries. Again, huge fan of Final Girl Support Group. I'm a huge slasher fan, and I loved every kind of little bits and pieces. But we'll get to that point when we get to that book.
Okay, I was going to say, what's your franchise?
My franchise, it used to be Halloween, but I'm getting so more kind of love for Friday the 13th now. We have a film podcast as well. Every Halloween we'll do the three main franchises.
Right.
So we'll do each year will be one of them. We're up to 5 now, and I think the Friday the 13th is the strongest one out of all of the franchises. I think that's
you are a wise man. I've always thought Michael doesn't seem to be having a lot of fun, and I feel like Freddy's having too much fun, and I feel like Jason is just a professional. He enjoys his work, and he goes about his business. You know.
Just don't have sex in his woods. He's fine.
Yeah, doesn't like it.
I just find that with the whole franchise, they change it up so nicely each film.
Yeah.
With Freddy, a little bit too much.
Well, with Freddy, it's interesting because New Nightmare, I actually did not like when it first came out, which I think is Nightmare 7, technically.
Yes.
And then I saw it again a couple of years ago and really loved it. I really had not appreciated its charms. But Nightmare movies rely really heavily on special effects. And the Halloween movies rely really heavily on lore, or they started to as they went on. I mean, so much gets made out of first the Druids and the Blackthorn, but then so much gets made out of Laurie Strode and Michael and their relationship and their backstory. And I feel like Friday, the movie is the movie you're watching. Yeah. It's reliant on whatever they're constructing within that movie. And sometimes it's not great, like Michael Takes Manhattan. But sometimes it's like The New Beginning and it's fabulous.
Yeah, but Jason Takes Manhattan is has got a soft spot in my heart. I don't know why. I think it's because...
No, listen, punching off the guy's head is phenomenal. Yeah.
Half the film, he's not even in Manhattan. He's literally for 5 minutes.
He's on a boat.
He's all on a boat.
But Jason Takes a Slow Boat to Manhattan does sound worse. Not as compelling.
Plus, then you get Jason X as well, which is one of the best films ever made.
Oh, it's so much fun. Yeah, it's really a blast.
Awesome. We'll get a bit further into your horror movies later on. I can talk about horror movies all night. But, what I like to ask every single guest that comes on the podcast is, how did you get into the horror genre?
I mean... there are bits and pieces. Like, I wasn't a big horror reader when I was a kid because I was growing up in the 70s and 80s and the covers were really gross. It wasn't my thing. I was much more a sci-fi kid, a fantasy kid. I read Stephen King, but I think everyone did. And King was a little taken for granted. Now I really appreciate him a lot more. But at the time, it's another Stephen King book. One comes out every year. It was easy to sort of take it for granted. But I think what really activated me was finding a couple of water damaged copies of Clive Barker's Books of Blood in probably around 1988 in a beach house we were renting. It's the ones with the American ones with the Halloween mask covers.
Yeah.
And there was something about them that felt written. Stephen King is a very loud writer, lots of italics, lots of stream of consciousness, lots of weird paragraph breaks and stuff on the page. Barker felt more elegant. And I really appreciate Stephen King's writing. Don't get me wrong. But to me at the time, Barker felt more elegant. The stories were all so different from each other. I mean, to go from The Yattering and Jack, which is sort of a slapstick comedy, to Son of Celluloid, which is kind of a body horror gross out, to Rawhead Rex, which is just ridiculous over the top monster story, and then to wind up with something like In the Hills, the Cities, which is almost psychedelic. And there was also something that really Barker does a thing where he inhabits every point of view in those stories. And they were queer characters and women and men and black characters and, Arab characters and just and he drops you into the heads of everyone, even the monsters, even the animals sometimes. And so it just felt huge. It felt like a new world. And so it really blew me away. And actually, one thing I'm really excited about is my publisher in the States is Berkeley, which is also the publisher of the first 3 books of Blood. And I've been harassing them to bring them back out in a new edition for years because they just sell them as this ugly trade paperback. And so finally this year, they're doing it. So all these horror writers are on board who are going to participate in the afterword. There's an intro from Clive Barker. He's doing a new cover. Like, it's really, it's like practically the 50th anniversary. And I feel like these stories have gotten a little forgotten.
I think it depends on the era, because obviously Clive Barker, very big in the UK.
Sure.
And UK fiction, I don't know, I think it's definitely got a different feel than US horror, especially in the 80s.
Absolutely. Over here, we're like James Herbert who?
Yeah. But you've got James Herbert over here. You've got Sean Hudson, who was quite big on his kind of like the rats and slugs.
Yeah, Guyan Smith.
Sorry, slugs, that's what I meant to. Yeah, and crabs and, that kind of thing. It's all kind of creature feature. You had kind of... It's a different style. I always find it, especially like with crime fiction as well. Crime over here is more closer to horror than it is in America.
Right.
I don't know, it's grittier here.
Although that sells now. A lot of those, Ian Rankin, a lot of those guys, not Ian Rankin, who's the guy who writes the Detective in Edinburgh? I can't remember. But a lot of those guys are coming over here now because we want a little more hard-edged mystery in the States. I think in the 90s they started getting imported more.
Which is nice to hear, actually. Because with crime fiction, there's some dark stuff in there.
Yeah. But I also think for new readers, especially kids, Barker doesn't have the same profile now that he did in the 90s, when he was very actively putting out novels and things. So I think these stories still hold up. And I think even though politically people might cock an eyebrow here and there, I think that stuff's so minor,
Cool. So what was it that kind of, because you're saying he wasn't really a kind of a huge reader of a kind of horror. So what kind of got you into horror? Is it more the film side of things that got you more into kind of the genre?
Well, I was reading King, and then I found those Barker stories, which really sort of introduced me to reading horror more than Stephen King. But yeah, it was films. It was watching films with friends, having sleepovers, renting a bunch of tapes from the video store. And so for me, horror was from the jump, a very social, fun, interactive activity. It wasn't just on your own,
Yeah. It is better in a crowd. It is definitely better in a crowd.
Yeah, exactly.
Film festivals are one of the kind of the big things as well. We have Fright Fest in the UK.
Fright Fest, yeah.
And it's so much... The things you can laugh at in a group, you wouldn't laugh at on your own. It's a fun experience.
Yeah. Well, it's also, there's also something about being with a crowd that's caught up in a movie too. I saw the French film Martyrs in a packed theater for its North American premiere. And that was, we had people fainting and throwing up in the lobby. And it was an intense experience. Fights broke out afterwards. So it's like, I really love seeing a movie, especially in a film festival crowd that's there for the movie. It's not just something they're doing before they go grab a beer.
Yeah. That's not the thing you want to watch before a beer either.
No.
Cool. Awesome. So before we get into kind of how you got into writing yourself, what we like to do here in the podcast is force authors to pick 3 books they love, because I'm a bastard. So, what have you brought along as your first bloody good read?
Okay, so I'm going to stick with horror. Because I mean, my favorite book of all time is True Grit by Charles Portis, the Western. But I'm sticking with horror. And so the three books, the first one is a Western to some extent, but it's The Beguiled, the 1966 novel by Thomas Cullinan, it was made into a movie by Sofia Coppola. It was a Clint Eastwood movie back in the 60s or 70s. And it's set during the American Civil War, and it's about a school for young ladies out in the middle of nowhere, and they're kind of just holding on, not enough to eat. They're just staying put as the war rages around them, and they're in the South, and a wounded Union soldier washes up kind of in their backyard, and it hops from one girl's head to the other, as the mere presence of this man sort of destroys the entire house. It is a really unsettling book.
Cool. Not been picked. True Grit has though. So no, that's a nice little swerve.
Who picked True Grit?
It's been picked 3 times.
Oh so wow!
Earlier on in the podcast, I have no idea who picked it up. It's been so long, 108 episodes. But no, it was it's been picked 3 times. A lot of westerns get picked on here for some reason.
There's good ones out there.
Cool. So, what was it that got you into writing? Was you kind of quite a keen writer in school? Was it more kind of like an after kind of university or college or?
No, it was. I mean, I wrote a lot in school. I was very bad at school, and writing was one of the few things, and reading I could do. And I realized I could be very confrontational and force confrontations. I could upset people. I could, it could do a lot. It was really powerful. And so I loved it. And I mostly did theater, though. I was writing a lot of plays, performing a lot of plays. And at a certain point in university, I realized that if you're doing theater, you spend most of your time making people learn their lines and yelling at them to come to rehearsal. And so I realized writing was the one thing I could do that I didn't have to rely on anyone else. And so for a long time, I was writing plays, I was trying to write everything except, prose. And finally, I was like, well, those all require other people as well to produce them or invest in them or things like that. So, all right, it's stories or nothing.
Was it short stories you started with, or did you go straight into kind of, was it horror? I don't know.
Oh, it was it was anything. I mean, I started so many books that I never finished. Short stories I did finish, short stories that got really long, poetry. I mean, anything, it was trying everything.
Okay. So then we get to 2014. So this is when your debut novel, Horror Store, comes out. Where did you get the idea of it being inside an IKEA?
So that was my editor, Jason Rakulik, because he had read a novel I had written about a haunted house called McMansions of the Damned. And he liked my writing style, but didn't like the book. And he really wanted to do a revisionist haunted house novel. And we were talking, and he wanted to set it in a big box store. And as we talked, he said IKEA. And then he had the idea to sort of do it to look like an IKEA catalog. And I was like, great. So I pitched him a version of it. He didn't like it. Then I tried to pitch him another version of it that he liked a lot more. And then it was just off to the races. But I've always worked really tightly with an editor. Like I came out of journalism, so I'm really used to writing not being the product of one lone genius in a locked room. I like the back and forth.
Okay. It's an interesting way of setting it out, though, as a like a catalog wise. It's a very interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, Jason had a really, really good eye for design and for marketing. And he wanted to give it the trim size of an IKEA catalog and the cover that looked like an IKEA catalog. And then, because the publisher I was using at that time, Quirk, was very small. It was so I could work really closely with Jason and with Andy Reid, the art director. And so after that, it was really kicking ideas around. Andy would say, well, why don't we do a different piece of furniture at the top of each chapter. And I'd say, okay, well, I'll write the catalog copy for that. And then I was like, oh, what if they got darker and turned into torture devices as the chapters progressed? And then it was, oh, hey, can we do a double page spread of this? Can we do an order form? And we just kept bouncing things between us. And the book just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
And it was a big hit. A lot of people loved it.
Yes, although it taught me a really bad lesson because that book did do very well internationally. I sold a ton of foreign rights to it. And I was like, whoa, yeah. And so when I went to do my next book, I think I sold it to one foreign country. And what I hadn't realized is every country in the world knew IKEA. So they all wanted to buy the IKEA horror book, but no one was that interested in the second one.
Well, the second one, no, it does kind of go into your love of horror cinema, because it's my best friend's exorcism. It's the 80s as well, right. So it's quite one of the most popular eras in horror. So I'm surprised if Shane didn't go as well over here, but I'm surprised it didn't do as well.
I think it took a while for that one to even sell to the UK. Yeah, it was just people thought it was too weird, it was too regional. It wouldn't be accessible to other people because it was set so particularly in an American high school. And it was based so much on America in the 80s. I think publishers underestimated their readers, but that was the wisdom. So, but that one's based very, very much, very closely on my high school and my high school experience and people I knew in high school.
So which one of your titles did you find kind of over here in the UK hit the point? I mean, obviously, you had Southern Book Club, and then you had Final Girls after this.
Yeah. Let's see, what came after Best Friend's Exorcism? Was it Final Girls or Southern Book Club?
Southern Book Club. But you did also have Paperbacks from Hell, which we'll talk about in a minute. Because
I think old school horror. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think Paperbacks from Hell opened a lot of doors for me. But I think Southern Book Club is the book that really sort of lifted everything. And the reason that book worked is because of the pandemic, I think. It was, it's set in the neighborhood I grew up in. It's very closely inspired by my mom's book club. It, about a bunch of women in the 90s, and the vampire moves to their neighborhood and they have to deal with him, and they're all in a book club together. And I had written a book right before that called We Sold Our Souls. It was a heavy metal horror novel. And it really, I love it, and people love it now, but at the time it did not do well when it came out. And so Southern Book Club was kind of my last chance, really, as far as my publisher was concerned. And I very intentionally put the word book club in the title because I knew that would appeal to book clubs. And it came out, in April of 2020. And that was a point when a lot of people were thinking, oh, the pandemic will be over in a couple of months. Let's push this book to fall. And by then it'll all be over and we'll be doing book tours again and all that. So I think my agent looked at the numbers and was saying that, and so Southern Book Club hit the New York Times bestseller list. After that, you say I'm a New York Times bestselling author. Publishers get a lot more interested. And I also think people were looking for something to read, and that was one of the few new books coming out. It was a more accessible title. It was a book they could, like, a lot of people could share with their moms or their daughters or people they were in a book club with. I think my agent looked at the numbers and was saying that the following year, 2021 or 2022, if I had released Southern Book Club then, it would have been ranked. It wouldn't have made the list just because, the numbers it was doing were good, but it had no competition. So it wound up on the list. So that really was sort of a final Hail Mary that worked through no control of my own. And the weird thing is, even though this was not anything the marketing department came up with, all the way back to the beginning, vampires have been linked very closely to pandemics. And in fact, that's where the original vampire stories come from, is trying to explain pandemic and disease spread. And so I always think it's kind of like a weird irony that my vampire book came out at the beginning of this massive pandemic.
I think it was going to have a love for vampires as well, especially in the UK. It's very romanticized here. I think Nosferatu is doing very well over here as well. So it's a good market to get into as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And as an editor said to me, she was like, she'd been an editor at Tor in the 80s and the 90s, all through the horror boom. She said, horror comes in cycles, but vampires, those books always sell.
Never go out of fashion.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, before we get on to my personal favourite, let's get to book 2. So what is your second bloody good read?
So my second one is, I think I'm going to go with a British book from 1996 by Anne Fine called The Tulip Touch, which is, Anne Fine is the woman who wrote the book that Mrs. Doubtfire, the Robin Williams movie, is based on. She's written a lot of books for children, and Tulip Touch is a book written for children, teenagers. And it's my Catalan translator turned me on to it. And I just read it a few months ago, and it really, really blew me away. It is a really unforgiving book. And it's about 2 girls growing up in the countryside, and one's good and one's bad. And things go wrong. And she wrote it in response to the Jamie Bulger murder in 1993, but not about the murder. She wrote it in response to the press coverage of the murder and how people were saying that these children were evil and they were awful and they were bad seeds. And her point is, no, we made them that. No one's born evil. That's a myth. That's magic. That's superstition. We made these kids evil. And The Tulip Touch is a really brutally unsparing book. It's written really gorgeously. It's very short. I read it in a day, about just what we do to kids and how we fail them and what the results are.
Good. Sounds like really good, but that's on my list now.
Has anyone picked that before?
That one, no, I've never heard of that one before. I didn't even know that she wrote Mrs. Doubtfire. So, yeah, I'm putting that one on the list, and the book for Mrs.
All right, it's good. You'll knock it out in a day.
Awesome. So, the Final Girl Support Group. I absolutely adore this book. It's the first one. It's the first book that I heard of yours. I never heard of your work before, but this one came up. It was either in a book box or it was from a publisher. I'm not sure exactly, but I devoured this book, and I'm a very slow reader. But the viewers of this podcast know the amount of guests I have on here. I don't have enough time to read many books.
Right. Sure.
I'm a very half book reader at the moment, but I couldn't put this one down. This is like on the train, anywhere I could sit. I loved this. But it goes back to, again, like we were speaking earlier, my love of 80s and kind of slasher horror. And I love the way that you blend in all the horror movies into the same characters in the book. It's slightly changed names, but we know who these people are. If you know, slashes, you know who each character is, which film it's supposed to be about. And I love how you kind of mold these all into one to get to the kind of the final gripping climax of the book. I absolutely love this book. It's one of my favorites.
Well, no, I really appreciate it. This book is funny. I've had 2 books where I had the title before I had the book. One was My Best Friend's Exorcism, and one was this one. And so everything in the book comes from the title. And this was going to be my book before Southern Book Club, and I gave a draft of it to my editor, Jason, and literally the day he got it, there was a trade announcement that Riley Sager's book, Final Girls, had just been acquired in a big publishing deal. And so he was like, I'm not going to read this. And so I wrote We Sold Our Souls instead, and Paperbacks from Hell. And probably around, I can't remember, but a couple of years later, I did a few new drafts of it and I gave it back to him, and he's like, I'm just not interested. This ship has sailed. It's sorry. I just think the timing's off. And I got it. You never want to sell a book that your publisher's not excited about. So, when my contract was up with Quirk after Southern Book Club, and I'd never had an agent before, and I had an agent then and a manager. I'd never had them for any of my other books. And my manager was like, do you have anything, I can just take out to Hollywood? Like, there's a book, maybe you wrote it a lot, maybe a short time. I said, well, I got this Final Girls thing, but no one likes it. And then he read it, and my agent read it, and they were like, okay, there's a book here. So I did some more rewrites and all that. And then that's what sort of the book that got me over to Berkeley. And the reason I went over to Berkeley is my editor there, Jess Wade, read it and was like, there's a big problem with this book. I mean, other people were sort of whining and dining me, and she was like, there's a big problem with this book. It's about these male monsters, but the serial killer, the killer in it, is a girl. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, you're right. Steph is, And so that was the moment where Sky, we were sort of changed a lot. And that book changed a lot. And in fact, I think it was August of 2020, summer of 2020, during the pandemic, Southern Book Club had come out, and this was the book I was working on, and I was doing rewrites on it, and it went over to Berkeley, and there was always something wrong with it, but that's when it got a lot more slasher heavy, is that summer. Not so much heavy, but like I just sort of doubled down on all the lore because I was living with my mom. She was having some health issues, and suddenly I was basically living Lynette's life. I mean, I was living in this room in the middle of South Carolina with my mom where we couldn't go outside. We couldn't go to the supermarket. Strangers were dangerous. At any moment you could get killed by a mysterious killer called, the coronavirus. And so it really helped a lot. But then as I was doing the last round of edits, there was just something about the ending that always bugged me. And I did a huge rewrite on it. So in the entire back third of the book all came out of a very last minute rewrite. Originally, Dr. Carroll's, it all unfolded at the end at a health retreat and all this. And it's just a radically different book. And it really all came together at that moment with this final rewrite. And one of the things I thought was really straightforward about the book, and I think it's the reason people like it, you can tell me if I'm wrong or not, and I think it's one reason Hollywood's had such a hard time with it, is I realized the book could get as ridiculous as I wanted it to be. But I had to take these women 100% seriously. I had to treat them not as badasses, not as little Buffy the Vampire Slayers, but not as campy icons, but as real people that had this thing happen in their lives. And from there, all kinds of nuttiness could ensue, but I always had to take them seriously. And so what I see happen a lot in LA with this, because had a few almost incarnations, is people get caught up in the campiness of the 80s slasher stuff and all this, and they miss that. And then they're like, well, why do these characters feel so flat? Why isn't this working? Why do they just seem like a bunch of complainy women? And I'm always like, because you're not taking them serious. But you can't really say that to people, then you sound like a jerk. So
I think what I love about the story in general is it's how it would be if this did really happen. It's not kind of
right.
They're not all going to be Sidney Prescott, who every time it's happened, right? Like by the 7th film, it's like, yeah, it's just happening again. You're affected by it, and it's always I've always wondered as a writer myself, it's if you were to do this, how would you then make the aftermath mean mean something? And I could never figure it out. Then reading your book, I'm like, got it. Right, that's how you want it.
Well, and that was my thing. And that was my thing right at the beginning. I was like, if this happened to someone, you'd be in a therapy group for the rest of your life. I mean, you'd never trust anyone.
No, you're looking over your shoulder each time. So again, I love this book. So
Thank you. No. I really loved writing this book. Was the most fun out of any of the books I've written, because I really loved Lynette a lot, and getting her to a better place was a really important thing for me at that point in my life.
Awesome. So you do have a brand new book out. But before we get to that,
yes,
I want to talk about your love of the horror films and Bats from Hell. I have a huge love for old school covers and kind of horror covers in general. And kind of looking back at the old kind of 70s, 80s kind of horror, that was a great time for paperbacks. You had stuff like Sean Hudson with some of the most covers, but you just want to pick them up and you want to kind of so I need to pick up a copy of your book. I haven't read it yet, but it's been drawing me in. But where did you love the covers from? Because I know earlier in we've been chatting, you wasn't really a huge fan of the kind of the gory covers. So did you love of them kind of paperbacks start to kind of manifest?
Well, yeah. So I always loved used bookstores, but like really like paperback swap shops, Oxfam kind of used bookstores, nothing really posh. And they always had big Western sections, big romance sections, and big horror sections. And I was looking around, I was like, I don't know any of these authors. And so I would just start reading them randomly and writing about them for this website called tour.com because I needed to make grocery money. And Jason, again, was reading those essays and he was like, these are really funny. You should pitch us a book. Like, I don't think we'll buy it, but I want to read the pitch. And they bought it. And so then I hooked up with Will Erickson of Too Much Horror Fiction because he really knew the history. And we dove in, and it was amazing, the story that was here. How these started in 1967 and died out by 1995, and just all the permutations and all that stuff. And I just fell in love with these books. I mean, I still buy them and read them now. It's such a lost slice of time. And it's really, it's really fun to find writers no one knows about. B, it really undermines a lot of the assumptions people make. I mean, there's all this idea about, in film, about folk horror and sort of, the Wicker Man and Witchfinder General and Blood on Satan's Claw being the three movies that kind of kicked that off in the late 60s, early 70s. But folk horror existed in paperbacks decades before that. I was just reading a book called The Witchfinders that came out before Witchfinder General, that's about a small British village where a square-jawed glider pilot comes across a coven of witches who are an ancient fertility cult who practice human sacrifice by burning people alive in wicker cages, but actually they're being mind controlled by a shard of Stonehenge that's been stolen, that's being used as a broadcast antenna by an ancient, unknown, primordial Lovecraftian evil. So it's like, here's all these sort of, but here's all these sort of Wicker Man tropes with this sort of ancient, evil, stone take Nigel Neal kind of take on it years before the Wicker Man appeared, and so it's just the books. I really think, the books are really undiscovered. It takes a long time to read a book. Not a lot of people do it.
Awesome. And also you have done a lot of articles and work within the film industry.
Right. Yeah.
Is it Asian horror seems to be? I'm looking at your website. Let me look at your website and have a little play around. Asian horror.
Yeah. I fell in love with Hong Kong movies in the 90s when I moved to New York. And my wife and I moved to Hong Kong after we graduated and lived there for like a year and change. And when I came back to the States, I was still there were still Chinatown theaters showing first run Hong Kong movies. And I was going there and I started writing for fan magazines about the movies because I knew a little bit about it. And I got really enmeshed in that world, which was just sort of appearing in the 90s, late 90s online and in fanzines and stuff like that. And it's just, something I did all my life. I wound up founding a film festival and doing a bunch of retrospectives and screenings for about 16 to 20 years, somewhere in there. And it became, the New York Asian Film Festival, which is up at Lincoln Center now. So I've just always done that kind of stuff. And I just really love the films, Yeah.
Cool.
And, it's also, I keep trying to smuggle Asian horror tropes into my books, but it doesn't work.
You'll make it work one day. You will make it work. Cool. Awesome. So, your brand new book, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, comes out this month.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the brand new book without spoiling too much.
So it's set in 1970 in a home for unwed mothers in Florida in the U.S. And there were a lot of these. I mean, they're not quite like the Magdalene laundries in Ireland. They were really, girls would get pregnant. They'd be sent to the homes. There were about 190 of them across the country. And their babies would be taken and put up for adoption. And they'd go home like nothing had ever happened. And so I had a couple of relatives who were sent away. And we didn't know that until very late in their lives. And I always thought it was a really fascinating environment. Here's a house hidden in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of girls with fake names, all of them pregnant, all of them teenagers. No one's telling them anything about what's going to happen. I was like, there's got to be a story here. And so this book is one I wanted to write for a long time. And basically the girls wind up at a home, 4 of them, and they discover, the late 60s, early 70s, a lot of these sort of tawdry pulp paperbacks about the occult came out. And these girls find one of those that actually has real witchcraft in it. And things get complicated.
Cool. Awesome. So that is out. I completely forget which day it's out now.
The 16th of January. Yeah.
16th of January.
In the UK.
So yes, go and grab a copy and pre-order it now. Knowing me and my editing style, it will be out this week or last week. It depends. Cool. Let's go into the final bloody good read then. So what is your final and third pick this week?
So this one's a little bit different. This is I'm not sure I liked this book, but it's a book called Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica from 2017, who's an Argentinian writer, I believe. And it is about a guy who works in a slaughterhouse, but the slaughterhouse exists in sort of a near future version of Argentina where there's been a virus and animal meat is no longer edible. And so they've started breeding humans because people love meat. And they've started breeding humans as cattle. And this is not the kind of book I normally read. It's very grim. It's very bleak. It's very dark. But I thought it was so politically savvy. And it was amazing to me how effective it was. I didn't know if I liked it, but I powered through it and couldn't put it down. And I thought about it a lot afterwards. And there's something, just the simple act of swapping humans for cows suddenly makes eating meat seem appalling. And like a moral crime that we cannot comprehend and that we all commit every day. And so it really stuck with me. So I'm not sure if I'm even recommending it, but it was a really powerful book. Tender is the Flesh from 2017 by Agustina Bazterrica.
I know it. I tried it. I need to try it again. I don't think my head was with me at that point. But I got this one and the most recent one, which is 19 Claws and a Blackbird. I got there on my...
those short stories, yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I'll try it. I'm going to try it again eventually.
Listen, I don't blame you for tapping out. I think that's a rational response to this book.
I do like grim though, so we'll give it a go. Awesome. That's 3 really good picks and 3 picks which we haven't had. So I'm great way to start. I feel very
intellectual.
So I can't let you go without mentioning 2 other things. You have a podcast. Which is Super Scary Haunted Homeschool. Tell us a little bit about the podcast and where can we find it?
So, you can find it, Super Scary Haunted Homeschool, like on Spotify, Apple. It's out there everywhere. Or you can just go to my website where you can link into it that way, GradyHendrix.com. I started it during the pandemic because I had all this vampire research and I wasn't doing a book tour for Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. And I didn't want to let it go to waste. And so I wanted to do a podcast that was about the history of horror. And I'd start the first season with vampires. Mm-hmm. Well, 5 years later, I finally have wrapped up the first season with the last episode about vampires that just came out in December. And somewhere along the way, this just metastasized into something huge. I mean, I now work with musicians and actors, producers, sound effects editors. Somewhere around, I think right after the episode about World War I and the early Universal Dracula in 1931, this thing just metastasized. It's one of my favorite things I do. It's, so much fun to put together, but it is really time consuming. However, right now I'm working already on season 2 with my team, and it's all going to be all about haunted houses, and that'll be sometime in the latter half of this year.
Awesome. That'll be 5 years of haunted houses as well.
Yes, exactly.
I want to give, obviously, your wife has a restaurant. which is
Yes.
Dirty Candy. And you also do have
Yeah.
a book, which is part comic book, part cookbook, which I thought was a very
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, she was getting all these. She was a chef, or is a chef, and she run Dirt Candy's like, God, it's like 16 years old now, and she was getting all these offers to write a cookbook. And the world doesn't need another book of recipes with pretty photos of vegetables. So we were arguing one day, and I was like, "This is really stupid. The only reason you could ever do a cookbook is if you did something ridiculous like a comic book." And then we both looked at each other and were like, "Oh, that's a really good idea." And so then we spent the next year writing it. And I think it's in its 7th or 8th printing now. It keeps on chugging.
And it's a beautiful website. I looked at her website with the restaurant, and I'm in the UK. I can't come over. If I ever come to New York, I'd love to come and visit that. Actually, it's gorgeous.
Come on down.
Gorgeous food. But anyway, so that is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. Go and pick up a copy now. If the podcast comes out later on, you listen to later on, pick it up now. And also go and check out a load of Grady's previous work, How to Sell a Haunted House, Final God Support Club, all of them. Go and pick them up now. All of them.
Oh, and can I throw in one other thing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I am coming on book tour in the UK for the first time. Yeah, I'm coming in, I believe it's April, but it's going to be announced soon. It's going to be for about 2 weeks. I'm going to be going everywhere from Cardiff to Edinburgh to Wales to London. And instead of doing an author event, I do a show. So I'll be doing a show about witches. I unfortunately sing in it. It's everything you need to know about witches in 1 hour.
Awesome. So yes, keep an eye on obviously Grady's website as well for that, and all the dates.
Yes,
all the time.
That's where it'll be announced. Yeah.
Social medias. I'll definitely will be sharing it. So keep an eye on our socials and Grady's socials as well. So yes, UK Talk. Go and make sure you're getting into that as well. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I'm very cautious on time. That's why I kind of
No. I appreciate it. No. But thank you. I really appreciate it, and it's great to meet you. Where do you live? I'm
southeast, so I'm Essex area, in the UK.
Oh, witch hunting territory. Matthew Hopkins
Very close to
I was just I was just writing the part of the witch show about him today. Have you seen these NEL paperbacks? The witches from the 80s that were like these sex. Oh my God. It's like there's 8 of them, and they have the most 80s cover. Look up, after we get off, Google James Dark with an E, the witches, and you'll see the covers, but they're all about Matthew Hopkins' protege torturing not saucy witches.
Always saucy witches. Always saucy. Yeah. Awesome. Where can people find you if you want to be found?
Oh, yeah. Well, GradyHendrix.com. That's the best place to either find me or avoid me.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. So go and check out Grady's website. And also, thank you for coming on the podcast this week.
Dude, thanks for having me.
Also, a huge thank you to our sponsor. He's been sponsoring us since the start of the podcast, Spawnable Book Club. They're the UK's best and biggest horror and thriller book box service, bringing the wonders of a haunted bookshop straight to your door each month. It's the best thing I look forward to each month. Come straight to your door. You get the bare bones box, which is just books, or if you're like me, you like to have everything inside the box, you can get a brand new book, a possibly haunted second-hand book, and another indie title. You also get UK sweets, UK drinks, canvas bags, badges, bookmarks, the lot. Go and check them out and use the code BloodyGoodReads at checkout to get 10% off your first box. And that is abominableBookClub at cratejoy.com. You can catch us over on Twitter at BloodyGoodReads, Facebook, BloodyGoodReads Book Club, on X, Threads, whatever, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere. Just look for us. We're on some social somewhere. And again, we are into our brand new year. We have some great crime and horror authors coming up this year. So do keep listening, and we'll see you next time.